Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Jim Pitts and the Honorable Tommy Williams. Sir, good to see you. Again, thank you. Senator, again, thank you very much in the middle. Thank you. Gentlemen, very nice to see you. Thank you for being here. I thought we might start with the state of the state. I know you saw it. I saw it as well. And let's do the math. $3.7 billion out of the rainy day fund for infrastructure. $1.8 billion for tax relief. We'll get to the mechanism on that in a second. $1.3 billion perhaps re-diverted back to transportation. What happened to the governor who hates spending?
Well, you'll have to ask him that.
Well, I'm asking you. Were you as surprised as some of us were that at a time when we're being told we have a spending problem in this state, and that the governor, who said historically he doesn't like taking money from the rainy day fund, all of a sudden now the rules seem to have changed?
I think that the governor laid out some priorities that we share in the legislature, and that's addressing some very critical infrastructure needs. I've been saying, and no one's really been paying attention all along, that I'd like to see some tax relief this session.
Yep.
I'd like to see it, I think it is yet to be decided. I think an increase in the homestead exemption is a good way to get tax relief to people. And so all the details, and I think he gave us plenty of room to maneuver. I don't feel boxed in by the State of the State speech at all, but I felt like he laid out a good vision for what we need to do.
Representative, that's just the governor's plan. In the end, it's your decision or your work in the legislature as far as what the specifics are.
That is correct.
Right.
And we have a lot of needs in the state of Texas.
Right.
We do have highway problems. We do need infrastructure for our highways and our water. We need to look at other needs of the state. I'm not one that's going to say I want to do a tax decrease or get money back until we look at all the needs that we have. And also, we've got a little court case going on.
Right, we'll get to that.
Okay.
On school finance, that might cost a little bit.
Cost a little money.
Right.
And I've been on the school board before, and we gave a tax reduction.
Yeah.
And then a year later, we had to go up, and nobody remembered that we went down. They all remembered.
All they remember was that you went up. So just so I'm clear, Mr. Chairman, are you opposed to tax relief in this session?
I'm not opposed to it. I just want to look at it.
You want to go a little slower.
This is early on, and we,
right.
And during the session, we need to look at it.
We'll get into some of the specifics on these issues in a second, but the mechanism is interesting to me. In the case of the rainy day fund, as you both know, you need 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate to approve any withdrawal from the rainy day fund. As I've said before up here, this is not a very spendy legislature. It's a conservative legislature. The Senate perhaps more conservative this session than it even was last session. The House, quite conservative. Many new members who came in pledging to reduce the size of government. Do you have 2/3 in both houses to take money out of the rainy day fund for anything, Mr. Chairman?
When I told my kids that when I die, I want to put on my tombstone House Bill 275 that was using the rainy day fund last session. And I said I would never want to do that again.
Well,
it was very hard to get 2/3 vote last session, and that was on unpaid bills
right.
that we had. And so when Tommy was named Chairman of Senate Finance, I congratulated him that he was going to carry all of the bills for rating.
Right. You'll be right there behind him. Is that it?
I'll be behind him.
Yeah. Well, do you have the votes in the House?
I don't know. We're just learning each other's names. We've got a lot of people.
All right. Senator, do you have the votes in the Senate?
Well, we'll see. In the past, if you've been able to reduce it to writing, you could often get 2/3 in the Senate. That's the way it's worked for a long time.
Right.
I think we've got a new body now, and I think it remains to be seen. Still early in the process, but I think we have the new members of the Senate are, for the most part, seasoned lawmakers. They have experience, and I think they're
right.
Able to understand what the state's needs are. And so I think once the Finance Committee comes to an agreement, I think we'll be able to...
And yet, Senator, many of those new members, Campbell, Hancock, Paxton, are among the most conservative members of the legislature, people who are expressly against the idea of spending needlessly. Isn't that a harder hill to climb with those guys in there?
I'm against spending needlessly also, but we do have some important needs. The state's growing very fast, and I think people will support. They want robust funding for highways. They want to solve our water problem. We've just completed higher education. We have some tremendous infrastructure needs in higher education if we're going to meet our education goals for the state. So all of those things, people will understand them, and they're not unreasonable, and that's the key. Is it needless spending or not, or is it something that we need?
You need.
Yeah, and I think they're reasonable in that respect.
And the tax relief, as I understand it, will require, again, to make it a constitutional amendment, 2/3 of both houses, and then it goes to the voters in November. Is that going to be any easier to get on to get through, Senator?
Well, you know, we need 2/3 to bring anything up on the floor, and so we have to get to that point to consider all legislation in the Senate. And my experience has been, both as a House member, and I don't want to speak for Chairman Pitts, but if you're putting something to the voters to decide, if folks think that it's a good idea that the voters ought to have a say in it, then it's often easier to
More
get
inclined
there.
to do it.
Right.
On the fund diversion question, Representative Chairman, this is $1.3 billion that the governor put down as a marker on redirecting money back to transportation. But the assumption is if that money's coming from DPS, you all are not going to just zero out the appropriation for DPS.
You know, when people say diversion to me, my back starts going up, because, you know, a diversion means that we have a fund that we're going to use for something else that's kind of not allowed.
Yeah.
But the Constitution tells us that we can use Fund 6, the highway fund, to pay for policing our roads.
Yeah.
And
This seems like it's in the...
that's not a diversion to me.
Right.
Now
Thank you for saying that. I agree.
So then what the governor is really calling for is an additional $1.3 billion in spending.
Well, you need to ask him.
But is that, I mean, I went into journalism not to do math, but I can do this math. I mean, if he's talking about $1.3 billion moved back over to transportation, but you're going to put the $1.3 billion back into DPS, he's calling for $1.3 billion additionally in spending.
That's your interpretation?
You don't want to get into this? Okay.
Well, what I would say is that we've looked at it very carefully, and of the $600 million a year roughly that comes out of Fund 6 for the Department of Public Safety, I think that we could reasonably say that a couple of $100 million of that meets the strictest constitutional muster.
Right.
And we're not to that part of the budget yet, so my committee hasn't heard any of the testimony, but my goal would be to take that other $400 million and replace it with general revenue. As you said, we're not going to zero out the Department of Public Safety.
Not really a
That's
savings.
really keeping our citizens safe is always at the very top of my list, and so
Let's understand some benchmarks as we frame the conversation about specific issues. $89 billion is the base budget. Some differences, modest differences, but basically that's it. If I understand correctly, the spending cap is $93.5 billion, so you've got about $4.5 billion to go. The numbers I've heard range from anywhere from $96 billion to $101 billion to maintain current services. Now, the Lieutenant Governor last week on this stage challenged that number. He said, well, I think it's actually probably closer to 93. Let me just put it to the both of you directly. Do you think that if you stick to the spending cap, you have the ability to fund state services adequately?
I do.
You do?
I do.
I think
so,
we do,
Mr.
too.
Chairman?
I do.
Are you assuming that you'll be able to get a legal opinion allowing withdrawals from the rainy day fund not to bust the spending cap? I know that's a controversy right now within the building. Some agree. Some think you can do that without busting it, but some think you can't.
I think there's
Senator?
a way to get there, and so the attorneys are looking at it.
But you would like to see the withdrawal not count toward the spending cap?
I think if it's cast as a constitutional amendment, there's a very good argument that it won't bust the spending cap.
I think we have a spending cap problem, and I know I was talking to Dale Kramer the other day. It was never the intent that use of the rainy day fund was counted as a part of the spending limit. But I think if we did it, we'd probably see ourselves in court, and so we need to really look at it. And as Tommy said, we're looking at that, see what we can do.
When you say we have a spending cap problem, I know what you mean, but I'm moved to ask you whether we have a general problem about having enough money to do all the things we want to do. I hear people talking about wanting to fix the water problem, which is a 50-year plan. We're not going to fix it all in the first year. We have a big transportation problem. We obviously, didn't spend as much money on public ed last session, to put it mildly, as we might have. We have a lot of needs and desires for this state. We even now apparently want to give $1.8 billion back in tax relief. I just can't make all the math work with the spending cap. I don't see how we can accomplish everything that we're being told we want to accomplish. Are you concerned whether we have enough revenue in a general sense?
I'm concerned that we have so many demands on our budget.
Right.
And we have a spending limit that will probably require us to leave money on the table. And And then we've got these ideas about the using of the rainy day fund for
Right.
those, that it's going to be a long session again, I'm afraid.
Right. Senator, Chairman, I remember when the comptroller delivered the revenue estimate, there was dancing in the streets over how times were better, things were better than we thought they were last biennium, things are better this biennium than they were last biennium, but now it's like austerity city again all of a sudden.
Well, there was 101 billion, which was the headline number, is a big number, and
Yeah.
I think that's what got people all excited. But when you drill down and you look at spending limits, and as Chairman Pitts has already noted, you take the demands that we're looking at and the spending cap, after you take care of the things that we have to take care of, you're probably looking at maybe $1 billion or so that we have under the spending cap of pure general revenue that can be spent. And so I think we have to be very cautious about how we proceed with this. So, and then I don't think that money out of the rainy day fund needs to be counted under that spending cap.
So maybe we have a little bit more.
So I think we've got more room when you use some of that to meet some of these other longer term needs that we have.
It's not the case, though, that we have so much money that we can just willy-nilly.
We're going to run out of room under the spending cap before we run out of money. I think that's pretty clear what you said.
I would say that's correct.
All right, let me ask about water specifically. So Lieutenant Governor may have been first out of the box on this, suggesting $1 billion out of the rainy day fund. Representative Larson on the House side also said $1 billion. Chairman Ritter said $2 billion, then Chairman Frazier said $2 billion, so we have a range there. Whether it's $1 billion or $2 billion, again, it's not going to solve the whole problem, but Chairman Ritter thinks we can't get it done for less than $2 billion. Senator, are you prepared to put your name behind a number on how much should come out for water?
No, we haven't even had the first hearing on that, but I think $2 billion is not an unreasonable number.
Not an unreasonable number.
I think it's a reasonable number, and we're not going to have to spend it all. Now, what you have to remember, too, is that what I'm talking about with the rainy day fund is taking that money and creating a revolving fund to help finance these water projects. That money won't get spent all at once.
Right.
And there's already room left in what we did last session. So I'm not sure that there is a lot of money that needs to be appropriated for this in the current biennium, but we need to show that we have a way to finance these projects over the long term. And so I think we can get there.
Chairman, do you think $2 billion is the right jump start for this plan?
Well, I was talking about during the interim was maybe $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
Alan tells me $2 billion will fully fund the plan, the water plan.
Right.
We have the money to do that if we get our spending limit problem taken care of.
Yeah.
And I would go up to $2 million for the water plan.
You would. Chairman Ritter has in the past talked about a tap fee. Some people are talking about a tax on bottled water, although Chairman Ritter thinks that wouldn't accomplish anything. Are there other things outside of the rainy day fund that either of you, as the keepers of the budget, are thinking might be good ideas to consider on the water issue, Senator?
Well, the two things that you named have been non-starters for over a decade, so I don't see either one of those going.
You know, Chairman Ritter's going to come back around again with a tap fee, he says this session.
Water really lends itself very well to project financing. And so I think if we create a fund to tackle the problem, that it will take care of itself for the most part. It will require some general revenue, but it'll be incremental amounts and it'll be spread out over time.
Chairman?
I think that what the chairman said is correct, and $2 billion, up to $2 billion should take care of the plan.
Without needing to go to any of these other measures. Tap fee reminds me of the increase in the car registration fee, which, Senator, you've talked about in the past. We move over to transportation. We obviously have, you know, if the water plan is $53 billion, it is set over 50. The transportation hole, the road funding hole, might be as much as 6 times that. I mean, I think when Deirdre DeLisi was still chairing the Transportation Commission, the number she used was $315 billion to maintain current roads with the current level of congestion, both of which are DOA, those two concepts, because we need more roads and we have a great population increase. So we ought to look at a lot of different things. You still think that possibly raising the registration fee would be a good way to bring money into the system?
I think there are 3 things that we need to do. We need a robust funding mechanism. I think the registration fee gives us an opportunity to do that. If you look at the cost of vehicle ownership, we're 44th in the country in the cost of vehicle ownership. If you allowed that number to go up over a few biennia, say 3 or 4 biennia, to double what it is now, that would put us middle of the pack, maybe even below the median.
How much money could you generate from that plan?
It would depend on how much leverage you used as a part of that. But I think overall that you could expect to get around $1 billion out of that over time as a revenue stream.
Yeah.
It's very predictable.
Not nothing, not an enormous amount, but not nothing.
But if you use that and couple that with using leverage debt to help build some of the roads, not all of it, I think also taking some money out of the rainy day fund and creating a road infrastructure fund, there's still some projects that could benefit from credit enhancement.
Similar to what you're doing on water.
Exactly.
How much out of the rainy day fund?
You know, I'd be willing to take $2 or $3 billion out for roads, but I don't know that everybody else feels as strongly about it as I do.
Well, the governor feels apparently not as strongly, because if I do your math, your number is bigger than his number as a withdrawal.
And that's right. And so I think it's a very important infrastructure need. Also, I'd say the $350 billion that's too big of a number for me to get my head around. I like to think of it more in terms of what do we need to do every biennium. Right now, we're doing about $4 billion a year in highway lettings. We don't want that number to go down. I think that we could reasonably expect TxDOT and the community that builds roads to do $6 or $8 billion a year. When you get above that, I'm afraid you start driving the price of your own projects up with money. And so I prefer to take it in smaller bites.
Smaller chunks. So as with water, Chairman, this is going to be a combination of state and local, and it's going to be a combination of public and private.
Yeah, and the piece that I didn't get to, the third part of it would be to allow local counties to adopt a registration fee increase to be able to generate local money. Yeah. That gives you a three-pronged way to help fund those roads. That last option's been very successful, and Cameron and Hidalgo County has used that, and they've used it very successfully.
Chairman, are you for the registration fee increase?
I tell you, I'm not Chairman of Ways and Means, but I would sure hate to go to this Texas House today and try to get an increase of fees or increase of taxes. I think it'd be very hard to come by today.
Are you personally for the chairman's plan? Would you be a yes vote?
I'd have to look at it.
He didn't say no.
He's going to get a chance to look at it.
He will get a chance. Chairman, the chairman has said here he believes $2 to $3 billion potentially out of the rainy day fund for transportation. Again, the governor wasn't specific. He didn't disaggregate water and transportation. How much would you take out for transportation?
Two.
You think
$2 billion.
You'd say two. Is that enough?
I don't think you can ever give enough for transportation needs. I'm getting ready to drive on 35E this afternoon, and it's going to be something I dread every day. Every time I get on the road, our roads are, with Texas growing the way it is, and now with the robust economy because of the oil fields, and all, we're tearing up our roads, and we can't ever get ahead of that problem. But $2 billion would probably help a whole lot.
Let me ask you about local control as it gets to funding of transportation, an issue that's come up before somewhat controversially. If the mayor of San Antonio can pass a modest sales tax increase, the voters of that community say we want to fund full-day pre-K for 4-year-olds. If the voters of this community can say we're going to agree to a modest tax increase to fund a medical school, why should people around the state not have the same opportunity to as Senator Corona and a couple of others have proposed previously, to say, look, if the state's not prepared to do something on the transportation funding issue, we'd like to go back home, vote ourselves a modest increase, and take care of the problem locally. Senator, why is that a bad idea?
Well, I voted for Senator Corona's bill. It failed in the House, and I think that the reason is there was something in there for everybody to hate by the time it got out of the Senate. It had just been loaded up.
That's the definition of a good bill.
It had been loaded up with so many things, and I appreciate his effort. I think the registration fee, local option registration fee, addresses that.
Would make the senator's bill essentially unnecessary.
Well, I think that addresses that need for local funding, and I think it's an important component.
Right. Chairman, it did fail in the House. What about that?
Well, you know, especially last session, any fees, any taxes was kind of a non-starter in the House.
But I thought that local control was a good thing. I thought we trusted the voters.
Well, I think that is a good thing, and I was on the school board for many years, and I ran for the legislature because I like local control, but it seems like we continue doing mandates here.
Explain. Continue doing mandates in what respect?
Well, I mean, in our school systems, we continue doing mandates. And,
right. But it would seem to me that in this case, Chairman, if the voters said we're going to support a small tax increase to do X and Y, the state's kind of out of it, isn't it?
Well, of course, I live in Ellis County, and it would be awful hard to pass any kind of tax in Ellis County.
But then that would be up to the voters of Ellis County to turn it down, right?
That's correct.
On health policy, Chairman, the governor repeated what he said a number of times before, no surprise, we're not going to avail ourselves of the opportunity to expand Medicaid federally. We're not going to create a health insurance exchange. That is, again, no surprise there. That's where he is, and you all may very well be with him on that, I assume so. Don't expand Medicaid? Don't create an insurance exchange?
Don't put words in my mouth.
Okay. Okay. Okay, Senator. I'm going to sit here and listen to your words. Go ahead. Are you with him?
I think that along with the other states...
That was a good one, by the way.
Along with the other states that are opposing expansion of Medicaid under the Obamacare plan, I think it's the wrong way to go. Medicaid, and I talked about this in committee yesterday, it's important that we take care of this population of people that are served by this program. But if you look at the growth of Medicaid over the last decade, it's been about 14% a year in our state budget. Right. Overall, the budget's grown 6 or 8% a year. And so that Medicaid growth above the base growth of the budget's crowding out roads, water, education, every other thing. Yeah. We have to find a way to meet these important social safety net obligations that we have as a society, but do it in a way that we can afford. I don't think expanding the current program is the right answer. I think that we have to have the federal government ideally block grant that money to the states, and if we can't get that, a big waiver program that allows us to design not just a program. Texas is a big, diverse state. I think it's going to take several programs to meet the needs of our state. We're handcuffed by the federal government now.
How likely is it that the government's going to say, okay, never mind on all those mandates, we're just going to give you the money?
Well, look at what's happened with the exchanges. They reset the deadline, and now they're saying there is no deadline on the exchanges. And so when you have big states like Texas and Florida that are saying we don't want to be a part of this, I think it's going to force the federal government to come to the table. And there was a lot in the Supreme Court ruling on Obamacare that I did not like, but the Roberts portion of that ruling that said the federal government cannot use federal funding on existing programs as a hammer to force you into new programs.
You like that?
That's very significant. Yeah. Think about the things like the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit that all of us in Texas love so much. Mm-hmm. That was forced because they were threatened to pull federal highway funding. Right. You know, that they can't do that anymore, the way I read that. And so I think it's very significant.
Well, it sounds to me, Senator, that in fact you do find yourself in a similar place with the governor.
Similar.
Yeah. But where are you different?
Well, I am not saying that I would never entertain an expansion of the program. It has to be not under the current circumstances, and I think that may be splitting hairs between what he said. I'm not trying to get in a debate with him about this, but clearly we don't want to throw more money in a program that it's not sustainable, that we cannot sustain this. Here's an important point. Yeah. The current budget, if you look at all funds for for education and for Medicaid in the budget that we introduced, the numbers are the same. When I started 16 years ago in the legislature, education was the biggest piece of our budget. Now that's no longer true. They're roughly equal. In my lifetime, if Medicaid continues to grow at the current rate, it will be the only part of the budget. Right. We can't do that.
I'm not going to dare assume what you think. No. Lesson learned. Where are you?
I serve on a hospital board back in R-Waxahachie, and I see all of the patients coming into the hospital, they don't have insurance. Right. We've got to solve that problem. Mm-hmm. And is that problem trying to get a block grant. I think that's what Texas ought to try to do. We do need to look this session on how we're going to solve the problem of uninsured.
Failing the government suddenly deciding to give you the money without strings, I mean, you understand, Chairman, the magnitude of the problem, 5.8 million uninsured Texans. It's not a new problem also. It's an old and my question to both of you is, it's not a new problem, and therefore, if you've not been able to solve it before, if the money's not been there to solve it before, what's different now?
I don't think there's anything different now as far as is that we have this large group of uninsured people, individuals coming to our providers. And especially last session, we lowered the provider rate.
Right.
If I was on Medicaid, I'd probably have to shop around looking for a doctor.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we need to look at, is getting to be very critical. I guess as I get to be in the Medicare age, I'm there, that I worry about being able to find a doctor for Medicare.
Yeah.
And I think that health issues is a huge problem that we have in the United States and also in Texas.
And the strings that would come with the federal money, just to close on the loop on this, the strings that come with it are bad enough in your mind that you're leaving all that money on the table that would potentially be available to you in the medium term. That's okay. It's worth leaving that money on the table.
I think you're putting words in our mouth again.
There was a question mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say this is the way you negotiate. And,
Use your leverage.
I think the leverage we have is they need to expand the program into some big states like Texas and Florida. Clearly, we're resisting the expansion of the existing program. I share Chairman Pitt's concerns. It says something about who we are. These are people who can't take care of themselves for the most part. It's an important program. Where I would say what's different, to answer that question, is what's different is the Roberts ruling and the fact that for the first time in my lifetime, we have some leverage to push back with the federal government.
Right.
And I think it's important that we assert our state's right to do this the way we want to do it.
Good. Let's move over to school finance. The assumption is that you all have hit the pause button effectively on the question of school funding while the court case is resolved. We'll get a ruling here whenever we get it, then we'll have an appeal in theory. The whole question of what you're going to fund schools, how you're going to fund schools, pardon me, at what level, that's kind of being pushed down the road a little bit, Chairman, correct?
By the school districts who filed the lawsuit. They're the ones who caused that to happen. We've grown a little cottage industry here in Austin to sue the legislature over school finance. And the people who are benefiting from it are the attorneys who filed the lawsuit.
You begrudge the school districts?
I begrudge the attorneys that are egging them on. This is not the way you solve this problem.
How do you solve the problem, Chairman?
You sit down and you work it out together. We are partners in local education, and you don't sue your partner. This is not the way you solve this problem. But as I said, it's become a cottage industry. File these lawsuits, push it out there, get it to the courts, and it's a terrible way to make public policy. But you have a handful of districts that think, I think incorrectly, that this is the only way the issue is going to get solved.
Governor Dewhurst, Mr. Chairman, said last week he believes we should take a couple $2 billion out of GR, I think he said out of GR, and put it to the side, kind of as a hedge against whatever the courts decide. Do you agree with that?
I think that's a good idea.
How much?
I think that's the order of magnitude.
Couple
it's going
billion.
to be around $1.8 billion to $2.2 billion, something in that range.
So that might actually be less money that you have to spend now because you're going to essentially put that in the
Well, I think in our
in the
base
coffee
bill,
can
we
for
both
the-
funded enrollment growth, and I think there's some things that we need to address in education. And when we looked at that, I pointed out some of the areas that I think that we could work on, and our work groups and your subcommittees will start to consider all that. It's very difficult to put new money into the formulas when they, first of all, are so opaque. Even the TEA can't tell us when we put money into the formula who's going to get the money. It's ridiculously complicated.
Right.
And so I think the simplification of that and the resolution of the lawsuit, so I think we're looking for, at least on my part, I think probably an epic battle on this in 2014.
Chairman, put money aside?
I think we have to to put money aside or leave money on the table, because that's what I worry about when we talk about tax refund, is that we've got this looming
Right.
IOU probably, we don't know yet, that we need to keep the money so we can fund our public schools. We did put it on pause. We can't outguess
What the courts are gonna
Supreme Courts are going to do, and
Right.
so I think that probably this whole session we're just probably going to do status quo on.
Did we, Chairman, did we adequately fund public education last session? Governor said famously at the beginning of this session that we had phenomenally funded public ed for the last 10 years. Do you agree with that?
When I go back home, I haven't seen the layoffs.
Have not seen the layoffs.
I have not seen the layoffs. I haven't seen the teachers and the school superintendents having come to me and say, "Oh, woe is me for this session." Now probably I'll get some calls now, but I don't think that we have. I don't think that we have underfunded education. I think that we have a huge demand for additional money in education that we'll be hearing from the courts in the
Right.
next
But
year.
you're satisfied that you sufficiently or adequately funded it the last session?
I was a former school board member, I guess. As my kids would say, they never got adequate enough money or Christmas presents, but I think we were able to give a basic education to all of our students.
Chairman.
Well, I think I agree with Chairman Pitts to a large extent. And what I would say is my personal observation, two things, they're anecdotal. The school district where my kids went to school, one of the 10 largest in the state, they cut their tax rate and they've maintained one of the highest pay scales in the state for new teachers. And so this is a fast growth district. They're absorbing, those fast growth districts absorb most of the enrollment growth in the state, about 90% of it. They've become very efficient. We have a lot of very inefficient districts. And so the efficient districts have found a way to make it work. The other thing that I would say is I've had some superintendents from very large school districts say, "Thank you, I never could have fired these administrators unless you'd cut my funding."
So in some ways you did them a favor.
They won't say it publicly, but
They say it to you
me
privately. We found out in the course of the revenue estimate that we had miscalculated or maybe estimated what our available money would be in the last biennium to the tune of $8.8 billion. If you had known back then that you had that additional $8.8 billion, would you have cut public education to the degree you did?
I don't think the legislature would have done that.
You don't think the ledge would have cut it?
No, not without the pressure of the budget shortfall. I don't think we would have.
I agree with Tommy on that, is that I would say 10 years ago, I don't think the Texas legislature would have cut money on public education. In fact, in 2003, when we had another shortfall,
Right.
I remember being called, I was chairman of the subcommittee on appropriations for education, and the speaker called me in and said, "You cut education, and there's not one person on the House floor that'll vote that way."
Right.
And so we did a corrective amendment and put $500 million from public ed
Back in.
Right. And we got the vote.
So what was different this time? The pressure was just too great?
I think there was a reality that we didn't have the money this time, and that was a reality.
Right.
And how could our comptroller how did she anticipate that our oil and gas discoveries would be so good in the last 2 years? And,
Right.
And she did, she did the best she could with the knowledge that she had.
Well, let me go there. This will be the last question. Let me go there. So let's assume the comptroller's work product was good, motives are pure, all that sort of stuff. Is this any way to be running a government? To be budgeting 2 years out, trying to predict in the future what's going to happen? Shouldn't we be budgeting yearly? Wouldn't that be a more accurate or appropriate way of doing this? I mean, this is not a rounding error, $8.8 billion. And you both acknowledge you might not have cut public education had the number been closer to what it actually turned out to be. But let's assume that there was no way to know 2 years in advance. Doesn't that tell you that maybe the system is broken, that we ought to be budgeting differently, Chairman?
I don't think so. I think we do an extraordinarily good job of writing the budget. We have some big estimates what's in there, but we have a way to deal with that through the LBB and the Supplemental Appropriations Bill, which keeps the legislature involved in the process. I would say that I want to echo what Chairman Pitts said about the comptrollers. She's had a big challenge. If you look at state sales tax revenue over the last 20 years, it has been extraordinarily volatile in the last 10 years, and no more so than in the last 5 or 6.
Right.
And so that makes it very difficult to forecast. We've never had the dramatic swings.
Right,
in
but given
revenue.
that volatility that we all acknowledge, does that not maybe say that we need to be thinking about a different way to do this?
Well, I think that it's working. I think the governor has the ability to call us back in if it's too far off track. And what I would say is I look around at the other 49 states, and no one's doing a better job than we are. And so Lord help us all if we get all the government that we pay for, so.
Oh, well, I'm going to let that go. We're going to have that be the end. That's a good way to end this. Chairman, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you being here. Thank you. Quick questions? Sure.